My 7-year-old daughter almost drowned in a neighbor's pool last summer. That moment still replays in my head. The screams, the frantic rush, the heart-stopping silence when she went under. Seconds felt like hours. By some miracle, we pulled her out in time. But that night, I promised myself something. Never again. That's why I installed a smart lock on my own pool fence, a small piece of technology that gave me peace of mind, a system that meant no curious little hands could wander into danger. For me, it wasn't just a lock, it was a lifeline, a promise to my daughter that her safety came first. But the neighborhood isn't built on promises. It's built on rules. And rules, in the hands of the wrong person, can be weaponized. The HOA Karen's son, a self-appointed watchman of community standards, saw me drilling in the lock one evening. He didn't ask questions. He didn't care that it was for my child's safety. Instead, he called 911, claiming I was defacing the neighborhood by violating something called community aesthetics. Imagine that, aesthetics over safety. But here's where it shifts. What he didn't realize was that the moment he stepped onto my yard to take pictures, he crossed a line. He wasn't protecting the neighborhood. He was trespassing. No knock, no permission, just entitlement. When the police cruiser pulled up, the air got thick. Blue lights flashing, neighbors peeking through blinds. The tension was real. The officer walked up, expecting to find some lawbreaker. But I stayed calm. I pointed at the boy on my grass, still clutching his phone like evidence. And then I said one word. That word changed everything. The smirk on his face dropped. His mother's voice, shouting from across the cul-de-sac, cracked. Suddenly, they weren't the enforcers anymore. They were the ones in the wrong. And in that single moment, panic set in. Not for me, but for them. Because the truth was clear. I wasn't breaking rules. I was protecting my family. And if the HOA wanted a fight over that, they had no idea what they'd just started. I'm Mark Reynolds, father of 2, former safety inspector for the city. We moved into this quiet suburban neighborhood 2 years ago. At the time, my wife and I were looking for the same thing every young family dreams about: a safe place to raise our kids. We wanted wide sidewalks where they could learn to ride their bikes, neighbors who waved when you passed by, and a community where children could grow up without the constant fear that creeps into so many urban settings. When we first drove through these streets, the promise of stability seemed real. Houses lined in perfect symmetry. Lawns trimmed to regulation length. Driveways swept clean. For us, it wasn't just about owning property. It was about finally feeling like we had found our home. The house we chose had everything we could have asked for: a big backyard where my son could kick a soccer ball, good schools nearby, and yes, a swimming pool. At first, that pool felt like the crown jewel. I pictured summer barbecues, birthday parties, and lazy afternoons teaching my kids how to swim. To me, it symbolized freedom, but that dream nearly shattered one afternoon. My daughter, only 7 years old, wandered into a neighbor's backyard. It happened so quickly, so silently. Kids don't understand boundaries the way adults do. One moment, she was chasing a butterfly. The next, she was standing on the slippery edge of a pool that wasn't ours. No gate, no lock, no adult in sight. By the time I realized where she had gone, she was in the water. I still remember that image like a photograph burned into my mind. Her tiny arms flailing, her head bobbing, her mouth gasping for air. Every father thinks he's prepared for an emergency. but nothing prepares you for the sound of your own child drowning. I pulled her out in time. She survived. But that brush with tragedy rewired something inside me. From that day forward, safety stopped being just a job I used to have. It became my personal mission. That's when I turned to my own pool. I had followed every rule since we moved here, paid my HOA dues on time, never left trash bins out past the designated hours, even volunteered for neighborhood cleanup days to show that we weren't just takers but contributors. I respected the system. I believed in order. But when I looked at my backyard, I no longer saw a place of leisure. I saw potential danger, an open invitation for the worst-case scenario. And I wasn't willing to gamble my daughter's life, or anyone else's, on luck or wishful thinking. So I made a decision. I bought a smart lock. Not just any lock, but one designed specifically with children in mind. A system that could only be opened with a code or a fingerprint. A lock that kept curious little hands from pushing open a gate. A lock that gave me peace of mind when I wasn't standing guard. It wasn't an act of rebellion. It wasn't me thumbing my nose at the HOA. It was the most responsible thing I could have done. The lock was kid-safe, pet-safe, compliant with state regulations, legal in every sense of the word, and more importantly, it was necessary. Because, as much as we want to believe suburban neighborhoods are safe, accidents don't care about zip codes. They don't pause because you live in a cul-de-sac with manicured lawns. They happen in silence, in seconds, when no one is looking. I've seen it firsthand, both as a safety inspector and as a father. Gates left unlatched, pools left exposed. Parents trusting that nothing bad ever happens here. But I know better. When I locked that gate, I wasn't just protecting my daughter. I was protecting every child who might wander in, every neighborhood, kid playing tag, every curious teenager sneaking around after dark. I did what any responsible parent would do, what any rational neighbor should support. But what I didn't realize at the time was how that single, simple act of responsibility would unravel everything else. That smart lock, the thing I believed would keep my family safe, was about to become the spark that lit a fire in this neighborhood. And it all started with one person watching me install it. One person who didn't care about safety. One person who cared more about aesthetics than lives. One person who picked up the phone and dialed 911, not because a crime had been committed, but because he thought my gate didn't fit the look of the community. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be about safety anymore. It was going to be about power, control, and who gets to decide how we live in our own homes. Her name is Diane Whitmore. Officially, she calls herself the HOA's Safety and Aesthetics Chair, though as far as I can tell, that's not even a real position. It's just a title she printed on fancy paper and taped to a clipboard, like a sheriff pinning on a badge. But in her mind, it gave her authority. Authority over lawns, driveways, fences, and, apparently, over me. She's in her 60s, always dressed like she's about to attend a country club brunch. White linen pants, a pastel pink polo tucked in just so. Big sunglasses that hide half her face, but never the frown lines around her mouth. She never smiles. Not a real one anyway. Just that tight, judgmental smirk that makes you feel like you left the house with your shirt on backward. And always, the clipboard. She clutches it like it's her holy scripture, filled with handwritten notes about who parked where, what shrubs looked unkempt, and which neighbor dared to bend the unspoken rules. She lives just 2 doors down from me. A house with a perfect lawn, but no toys in the yard, no laughter spilling out of the windows. Diane has no kids, no pets, no family dinners filling her dining room with noise. And yet somehow she has taken it upon herself to police everyone else's families, everyone else's choices. At first, her crusade seemed petty, almost laughable. The first citation I got from her was a $75 fine for having solar lights on my walkway. She claimed they didn't match the community aesthetic. Never mind that half the houses on our street had Christmas lights strung up well into February. My crime was apparently wanting to see where I was stepping after dark. The second was about my mailbox color. Beige instead of cream. Not different enough for any sane person to notice, but Diane noticed. She notices everything. Then came the trash can incident. One Friday, I rolled mine to the curb 20 minutes before the official allowed time. 20 minutes. Most people wouldn't have cared. But Diane? She called the city, filed an actual complaint. I had to answer a letter from municipal services like I was some kind of criminal. All because I was early with my garbage. Each little strike chipped away at my patience. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. But the strangest and maybe the most unsettling part? Diane doesn't always fight her battles alone anymore. Lately, she's been sending her grown son, Jason. Jason is in his 30s but lives with her. You see him at odd hours, a lanky figure standing at the edge of your property, pretending to check his phone but really just watching. He's the type of man who mows his mother's lawn in silence, earbuds in, eyes darting to see who's noticing. And lately, I've noticed him watching me. The first time, he showed up when I was fixing my fence gate. He didn't say anything, just stood across the street, phone in hand, like he was recording. When I asked if I could help him, he smirked and said, "Just making sure you're following code." Code, that word again. The word Diane hides behind. The second time it was worse. I was installing a smart lock on my pool fence. Something for my daughter's safety after last summer's scare. Jason strolled by, phone angled just so, like he was gathering evidence. Within hours, Diane had filed a complaint that I was making unauthorized modifications. It's no longer just fines or warnings. It feels like surveillance, like harassment. And here's the part that keeps me up at night. Diane and Jason don't see themselves as villains. To them, this is order. This is justice. They tell themselves they're protecting the neighborhood, keeping things safe and beautiful. But to me, it feels like prison walls tightening, one clipboard note and one camera phone recording at a time. The scary thing is, Diane isn't loud. She isn't violent. She doesn't need to be. She's slow, patient, methodical. She doesn't knock on your door and scream. She just files papers, sends emails, issues fines, calls the city. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And with Jason acting as her eyes and ears, I can't shake the feeling that their game is escalating. This neighborhood was supposed to be quiet, safe, a place where kids could ride bikes and neighbors waved good morning. But thanks to Diane Whitmore, clipboard in hand, son in tow, it's starting to feel like every move I make is under a microscope. And I'm beginning to realize, when someone like Diane sets her sights on you, there's no such thing as a small infraction. Everything becomes ammunition, and eventually, she will find a way to break you. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Jason, late 20s, Bluetooth earbuds always lodged in his ears like he was running a private mission, began coincidentally appearing outside whenever I was in my yard. I'd be trimming hedges, and there he was, walking his mother's little white terrier, except the leash was slack and the dog wasn't even interested in sniffing the grass. Jason's eyes weren't on the dog, they were on me. Then came the filming. One Saturday morning, I pushed the mower across the front yard, sweat dripping, earbuds in. I looked up, and there he was across the street, phone raised, camera lens catching the glint of sun. At first, I thought maybe he was FaceTiming someone, but the way he held it, steady, focused, directed at me. He wasn't documenting his day. He was documenting me. I waved, sarcastically, like, "Yeah, hi, paparazzi." No smile back, just the blank face of someone who thinks silence is intimidation. I told myself, ignore it. Neighborhood weirdos exist. Let it roll off your back, but it didn't stop. Next week, Jason stooped in front of my curb, zooming in on a tied-up dog poop bag I'd set aside while unloading groceries. He snapped photo after photo like it was evidence from a crime scene. Then, an hour later, Diane, clipboard queen, HOA tyrant, emailed me a gentle reminder about waste disposal procedures. Coincidence? No. Jason was her eyes, her surveillance arm. I ignored it, kept my head down, told myself not to engage. But then came the day of the smart lock. It was late afternoon, the kind of golden suburban hour when sprinklers hiss across lawns, and kids' laughter floats faintly down the cul-de-sac. I had the box open, tools laid out, instructions spread across the patio table. The new smart lock gleamed in the sun, brushed steel, sturdy, reassuring. This wasn't vanity. This wasn't community aesthetics. This was survival. My 7-year-old had nearly drowned last summer. Installing this lock wasn't optional. It was necessary. I knelt by the gate, screwdriver in hand, when I felt it, that sensation, like static on the skin. Being watched. I looked up. Jason stood on the sidewalk, not moving, not speaking, just staring, earbuds glowing blue. I clenched my jaw, tried to ignore him, went back to tightening the bracket. The lock clicked in place, secure. Relief washed over me for about 3 seconds, because that's when I heard it. The crunch of footsteps, not on the sidewalk, on gravel. My gravel. I whipped around. Jason had stepped off the public path, crossed the strip of lawn, and now, without hesitation, he slipped through the narrow gap at the side of my house. My gate was closed, my doorbell never rang. Yet here he was, walking straight through my side yard like it was his own. My heart slammed. "Hey!" I barked. No response. He walked further, slow, deliberate, like he was measuring the space. His phone was raised, recording every step. Finally, he stopped at the edge of my pool, the blue water rippling behind him. He turned, camera steady on me. "You're on private property," I shouted, voice cracking with disbelief. That's when he smirked. That little half-smile, smug, weaponized. "Mom says pool locks violate community standards," he said flatly, as though reciting a law. Mom says. Always mom. I felt blood rush to my face. "Leave now!" But Jason didn't flinch, didn't move. Just adjusted the angle of his phone like I was some insect pinned under glass. Inside, my instincts fought each other. One side screamed, "Call the cops." The other whispered, "That's exactly what he wants. He'll spin it. Diane will have her story ready before dispatch even picks up. Tick, tick, tick." My pulse matched the sound in my head. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was invasion. He was on my land, feet away from my pool, feet away from the very reason I'd installed the lock. "Jason," I said, lowering my voice, trying to anchor myself. "This is trespassing. You need to go." Still no movement. His earbuds pulsed. For all I knew, Diane was on the other end, listening in, coaching him live. The air between us thickened. Cicadas buzzed. A lawnmower 2 streets over hummed like static. The world felt too normal, too still, against the wrongness of him standing there. And then I realized something. I wasn't powerless. If he could record me, I could record him. Slid my phone from my pocket, thumb shaking as I hit record. The red circle blinked on the screen. I raised it, mirroring him, lens to lens. "Fine," I said, voice steadier now. "If you're recording me, I'm recording you. Let's see who looks crazier when this gets shown in court." For the first time, his smirk faltered. Only for a second, but I caught it. The power shifted, slightly, but that didn't mean I was safe, because the truth was, Jason wasn't stupid. He knew what he was doing. By stepping foot on my property, by refusing to leave, by weaponizing silence. He was daring me to snap, to shove him, to lay one finger on him, because then Diane would swoop in, HOA laws clutched to her chest, and I'd be the headline, "Aggressive neighbor attacks, young man monitoring safety violation." My phone trembled in my hand. I zoomed in, captured his shoes grinding into my grass, the trespass. Undeniable. Evidence. Leave, I said again. Last warning. Jason tilted his head, mocking. Then, finally, he turned, slow, like it was his choice. He walked back along the side yard, phone still raised, documenting his own retreat like a martyr. When the gate shut behind him, I realized my shirt was drenched in sweat. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment, his smirk, his silence, the way he stood by my pool, feet planted, as if staking a claim, and the thought gnawed at me. This wasn't the end. It was the opening move, because Jason wasn't acting alone. He was the messenger, the camera, the bait. And Diane, clipboard queen, puppet master, was the one pulling strings. The conflict wasn't just about a smart lock. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control, about power, about who got to define safety in a neighborhood that prided itself on perfection. Tick, 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 the clock was running. And I knew deep down the next escalation was already being planned. The silence was heavier than anything I'd felt so far. For a split second, the world froze. No birds, no lawnmowers, no chatter from kids riding bikes down the cul-de-sac. Just me, Jason, and the weight of what was about to happen. Then, like a blade cutting through still air, came the sirens. 2 minutes later, a cruiser pulled up. Its red and blue lights painted the neat row of houses in colors they'd never been meant to wear. The whole neighborhood, manicured to perfection, now looked like the scene of a crime drama. Curtains shifted. Garage doors cracked open just enough for eyes to peek out. People love rules until rules bring the cops to their doorstep. Officer Ramirez stepped out. Mid-40s, calm, professional. The kind of man who had seen enough drama to know when to keep his voice even. One hand rested casually near his holster, not because he expected trouble, but because protocol demanded it. His expression wasn't angry or judgmental, it was neutral. Trained. He was here to assess, not to assume. Jason wasted no time. He jabbed a finger in my direction like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "He's installing illegal equipment, violating HOA rules." His voice cracked slightly, betraying a mix of nerves and self-righteousness. He thought he had me, cornered that his mother's clipboard rules would carry the same weight as state law. He wasn't prepared for what came next. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match his panic. I kept it low, steady, the way I used to during safety inspections when a contractor swore his shortcuts were just as good as code. "Officer, before we talk about me," I said, "can we address the adult male who just trespassed on my property?" Ramirez's eyes flicked toward me, then toward Jason. He didn't react, didn't give away whose side he was leaning toward. That's the thing about good officers. They let the facts stack themselves before they decide. "I have video," I continued. Time-stamped. He entered without permission, refused to leave when asked. That was the first shift. You could feel it, a ripple, like the wind changing direction before a storm. Jason's confidence faltered. His posture, once forward, aggressive, leaned back, uncertain. "Sir, did you have permission to enter this yard?" Jason stammered, caught off guard by the directness of the question. I was just checking." "Did you knock? Call? Get consent?" Ramirez pressed. Silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. Jason's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He was unraveling, and the neighbors watching from their windows could see it. "Officer, I'm a certified safety inspector." My voice carried not just to Ramirez, but to the neighborhood jury hiding behind blinds and curtains. "This lock meets all city, state, and ADA compliance standards, and under Penal Code 602, unauthorized entry onto private property is trespassing, even for HOA members." You could almost hear the collective gasp. The entire power dynamic flipped in a single breath. HOA rules. Those sacred, self-invented commandments Diane had weaponized for years crumbled when held against actual law. And here's the truth most people never realize. HOA rules only have teeth if you let them. They aren't law. They're contracts, agreements, guidelines dressed up as legislation. And when those rules try to override state code or basic property rights, they collapse like a house of cards. Diane wasn't even here. She wasn't the one standing in my yard. Her son was, an adult male who broke the law. And I had it on camera. This moment wasn't just about me defending myself. It was about exposing the illusion of power that people like Diane and Jason cling to. They believe their HOA badge, real or imagined, makes them untouchable, that they can cite aesthetics like scripture and override your rights as a homeowner. But when the cruiser lights hit those white picket fences, the fantasy shattered. Suddenly, Jason wasn't the neighborhood enforcer. He was just a man standing on someone else's property without permission. Neighbors began to whisper. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel the change. They'd seen Diane call the shots for years, seen Jason act as her muscle. Now they saw the consequence. The law didn't bend for clipboards or committee titles. Officer Ramirez wasn't just a cop in this story. He was the pivot point, calm, methodical, unshaken by Jason's frantic accusations, by asking 3 simple questions. Did you knock? Call? Get consent? He stripped away every excuse Jason thought he had. That's the beauty of law when applied correctly. It doesn't need theatrics. It only needs clarity. Ramirez didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to threaten. His silence did the work. The pauses between his questions grew heavier each time Jason failed to answer. When I cited Penal Code 602, it wasn't just about showing knowledge. It was strategy. People like Jason weaponize ignorance. They count on you not knowing your rights. They assume that if they speak loudly enough, if they sound certain enough, You'll fold. But I knew the law. Penal Code 602 is clear. Entering private property without permission is trespassing. Period. HOA membership doesn't grant immunity. A clipboard doesn't make your shoes cleaner when they cross someone else's boundary. That's when Jason realized he wasn't accusing me anymore. He was defending himself. He went from aggressor to suspect in less than 5 minutes. And the irony? Diane wasn't even there. The queen bee of the HOA hive sent her son to do her dirty work. But her absence became her undoing. She couldn't spin the story in real time, couldn't redirect the narrative. All the neighbors saw was her enforcer caught red-handed, shrinking under the weight of actual law. Her absence made the whole thing worse. Because now, instead of being the commander, she was just a rumor in the background. And rumors can't stand against flashing lights and written codes. This wasn't just a single confrontation. It was the reveal of something deeper. The truth about power in communities like ours. HOAs thrive on perception. They need you to believe they're omnipotent. They need you to fear fines, letters, and meetings where they wave bylaws like sacred scrolls. But the second you peel back the curtain, you see it. They're just neighbors with clipboards, no more lawful than you or me. Jason had weaponized the rules to try to humiliate me, to make me bend. Instead, he exposed himself as the lawbreaker. Diane had built her empire on intimidation, but when tested against real codes and real consequences, her castle was made of sand. By the time Ramirez finished questioning, the silence spoke louder than Jason's earlier outburst. I didn't need to push further. The lock was legal. My daughter was safe. My rights were intact. And Jason? He was standing in the wreckage of his own arrogance. The reveal wasn't about me winning. It was about everyone else finally seeing the cracks in Diane's authority, seeing Jason for what he was, seeing that the law was not on their side. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel like the outsider fighting to justify myself. I felt like the homeowner, the father, the protector, and the neighborhood, whether they admitted it or not, knew the truth had finally been spoken. His tone was calm, almost surgical. No theatrics, no raised voice, just the weight of law carried in a steady baritone. Son, you're lucky he's not pressing charges. You entered without consent. That's a misdemeanor. The words landed heavier than any shout could have. For the first time that day, Jason's smirk cracked. His posture stiffened. His eyes darted from me to the officer like he was looking for an escape hatch that didn't exist. And then Ramirez, still firm but professional, adjusted his radio and said the words that made my chest unclench. "And ma'am?" He called out over the frequency to Diane. "Your son is trespassing. Advise him to leave immediately." She arrived exactly 5 minutes later, as if storming a stage she believed was hers. Clipboard in hand, white linen pants swaying, pink polo tucked in too neatly, as though authority could be ironed into fabric. She moved fast but deliberate, a woman convinced of her own jurisdiction. I'd seen that walk before, on neighborhood streets, at HOA meetings, during moments where she wanted everyone to know she was in charge. But this time, Ramirez stepped in front of me, intercepting her before her mouth could fully open. "Ma'am," he said, voice clipped but respectful, "your son violated trespassing laws. This man is within his rights to install safety equipment. If you have a complaint, file it through legal channels, not by sending family to invade his property." She froze. That clipboard, which normally felt like a gavel, suddenly looked flimsy, almost pathetic. Her mouth opened, then closed again, like the words she wanted to use had been confiscated by the officer's authority. For the first time, she wasn't the judge. She was the defendant. Jason, usually loud, suddenly had nothing to say. His earbuds hung around his neck like broken jewelry. His bravado had evaporated, replaced with the awkward silence of someone who'd been caught doing exactly what he accused others of doing. Diane's face flushed red. Not the kind of red that comes from anger, though anger was certainly there, but the kind that comes from public exposure. From being called out directly with no escape route. She glanced at Jason. He wouldn't look up. He studied the grass, the driveway, the cracks in the pavement, anywhere but the officer or me. For months, I had felt cornered by their constant surveillance, nitpicking, and intimidation. But now, the tables had turned. And it wasn't because I had shouted louder or played their game. It was because the truth, paired with calm patience, had finally caught up to them. Then Ramirez looked back at me. His stance softened, the faintest trace of a nod acknowledging not just my compliance with the law, but the reason behind it. Smart lock's legal. Keep it locked. Keep your kids safe. It wasn't just permission. It was validation. After weeks of tension, false accusations, and walking on eggshells in my own backyard, I finally heard it out loud. I wasn't the problem. Safety wasn't a crime. A father protecting his children wasn't a violation of aesthetics. The IA law was on my side. What struck me most in that moment wasn't Ramirez's words, it was Diane's silence. For months she had written emails, filed violations, snapped photos of dog poop bags, and lectured neighbors as if the HOA bylaws were commandments carved in stone. She lived for the sound of her own authority. And now she had none. Her son had crossed the line, literally, onto my property, without my consent. And in that moment, every ounce of her self-appointed power evaporated under the clarity of the law. Her clipboard lowered. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed, not at me, but at the situation she couldn't control. When they finally turned and left, Diane clutching her clipboard like a useless shield, Jason trailing behind like a scolded child, something inside me let go. For the first time in months, I felt safe in my own backyard. Not because Jason wouldn't try again, not because Diane would magically change her behavior, but because now there was a record, a moment. A legal acknowledgement that they were in the wrong. Every siren I had heard that night had first sounded like judgment, like backup for them. But now, that siren became a symbol of balance, a reminder that justice still had a place in the cul-de-sacs and sidewalks of suburban America. In neighborhoods like mine, perfect lawns, HOA newsletters, kids on bikes, conflict doesn't always look like broken windows or loud parties. Sometimes it's quieter, petty, a war of clipboards, complaint emails, and passive-aggressive stares. But here's the truth. Even in the quietest suburbs, law and rights still matter. Property lines exist for a reason. Privacy exists for a reason. And the safety of your children is never something that should be debated by a committee obsessed with uniform mailbox heights. That night, it became clear that HOAs might hold sway over paint colors, lawn lengths, or whether your trash bins can be seen from the street, but they don't override the law. They don't override a parent's responsibility to keep their children safe. Justice doesn't always arrive in flashing lights or dramatic courtroom scenes. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a calm officer stating plainly that you were right all along. Sometimes it's not about punishment, it's about recognition. about watching the self-appointed authority figures, the ones who thrived on intimidation, suddenly confronted with the truth they can't spin. That was my moment of justice. Not revenge, not triumph in the theatrical sense, just peace. The peace of knowing that my kids could run in the backyard, and the only lock they'd ever need was one I had installed with my own hands. The HOA board finally convened to review what happened. For the first time in years, people actually showed up to one of their meetings. Word had spread about the trespassing, the police, the so-called inspection by Jason. Neighbors, who usually stayed quiet, began to murmur, and for once, the board couldn't ignore it. After hours of discussion, they voted to revise and strengthen the community's pool safety regulations. Not rules about fence colors or aesthetic harmony, but real, practical rules that could actually save a life. Things like secure locks, required alarms, and parental consent for any kind of access check. The kind of common sense changes that should have been in place years ago. And Jason? He was banned from ever conducting inspections again. Yes, they actually had to pass an official motion saying the man who had no authority in the first place was not allowed to play pretend. Security guard. A ridiculous outcome, but at least a clear one. As for Diane, she resigned. The official reason was for personal matters. But everybody in the room knew the truth. When power comes from intimidation, it only lasts as long as people stay silent. The moment the community saw her son cross the line, and the police called her out, her influence collapsed, just like that. Now, I want to be clear, I don't hate HOAs. They're not evil by definition. Rules, when made with fairness and reason, help neighborhoods stay clean, safe, and welcoming. But what this experience taught me, and what I hope you hear loud and clear, is that there has to be a line. Because safety comes first. Always. No matter how many forms, committees, or aesthetic guidelines exist, no one, not a self-appointed inspector, not a clipboard-wielding chairperson, not a so-called community czar, has the right to override a parent's duty to protect their children. The law is very clear about two things. First, it protects property rights. Your yard, your home, your fence, those boundaries are not decorations. They are legal lines, and crossing them without consent isn't enforcement. It's trespassing, period. Second, the law protects children. Every parent has both the right and the responsibility to safeguard their family, and no committee rule book can erase that. That's why I stood my ground, not out of defiance, not to make a scene, but because when someone tells me that a fence lock for my daughter's safety is a violation, they're not just nitpicking. They're putting her at risk, and risk isn't negotiable. So here's the takeaway. If anyone ever pressures you into giving up safety for the sake of standards, remember where the law stands. Remember whose side it's on. And remember that compliance with unreasonable demands isn't kindness, it's surrender. When someone steps onto your land without permission, don't let their badge of authority, whether real or imagined, intimidate you. They're not upholding the rules. They're breaking them. In the end, what matters isn't how perfect your hedges look, or whether your mailbox is the right shade of beige. What matters is family, safety, the peace of knowing that when you close your door at night or lock your pool gate, your loved ones are protected. Stay safe, know your rights, and never, never let fear override family.